Happy New Year. Welcome to 2023. Hope you guys had some good time off with friends and family over the holiday break. And this is Figure It Out. If you've never joined me on the channel before, hi, my name's Steve. I do a bunch of work here on my A4, S4, and now my new S8 D2 that I bought from across Canada. Obligatory YouTube requests here: subscribe, like, find me on Instagram at Figure It Outy. But today's a good one. I am suited up because I'm going to pull the engine and trans on this thing right off the bat. Like I said in the last episode, which you can follow and catch up on right here, I am trying to do as much work as possible up front here to build my entire shopping list, which I know is going to be very, very long, as quickly as possible. This car is in okay shape. Engine bay is a little bit rough. Engine is healthy, maybe, seemingly, but tired. I know that there's going to be so many things I need to replace here, so I'm just absolutely going for it. And again, I've never done this before. I am quite literally benefiting from decades worth of experience in the D2 platform community here. So thank you to those who came before me. And I'm following a workshop manual that I found online to go through this procedure of pulling the engine and trans together. Day two, I'm going to try again. I'm just wearing the same clothes today. Day one was kind of a disaster. It's just one of those days where the car fights you the entire way. Everything is rusted. Every fastener is rusted. I still haven't got the bumper off. That's still the first order of business. I made it to like step 4 of 200 on the pull the engine checklist. And I've armed myself to the teeth today. So let me just show you what's kind of going on. The biggest issue so far was that the other bolt on the passenger side here that holds the crash bar into place, because you get to just pull the whole bumper straight off, is spinning in place. It's backed out, I think, almost all the way in terms of how many threads need to come out, but it's just spinning. And I've tried to pry it out. I've tried a million different things and it will not come out. So I figured, okay, why don't we try to go in and pull the headlight out? Because if I can pull out the light, what I can actually do is go upstream in the system here and I'll just detach the crash absorber bar. So it won't matter if I can't get this bolt out for now. I'll still be able to pull off the bumper. You know, let's go take the headlight off. Nope, rusted, stripped and rusted. Everything is coming out like this. I'm getting like half of them out at a time. And I'm also spending a lot of time labeling all my hardware so I know where it goes later. So I went shopping this morning and I got myself some stuff. If you're from Canada, you probably know what KMS Tools is. It's sort of just like a club member, but like retail pricing kind of place where you can get lots of name brand tools and some other stuff that you can't normally find or you would have to buy online. They got pretty good deals. It's a great place to shop. And I have armed myself to the teeth with everything related to extraction and rust. So I went out and I bought all the different types of stripped bolt extractors. I got myself a new little pair of gloves. I got a really nice set of Bosch drill bits because I know I'm going to be drilling some things out. I have a very specific bit to make sure that I can reach in here under the headlight and get the one fastener that is rusted that I can't get out right now, and then I can actually move on with today. I've got my actual extractors too of different types. And I went ahead and bought myself a little bit of an upgrade here. This is Milwaukee's friction ring based brushless motor 1/2-inch drive impact wrench. And it's nice and stubby too, so I'll be able to get in a lot of good places. And it came with some drive sockets too that I already have, but you know, gotta love a couple extra $100 worth of sockets. I feel like I ran out of brain power at the end of that last clip. Point is, I'm going to take this long bit that I bought, drill out this fastener, get the headlight out, get the bumper off, start draining fluids, make up time for yesterday. Here comes another time lapse. Teardown session 2 went much better. The bumper's off, but not without its own surprises. Check this out. At first, I saw the self-tapping screws holding in the lower side of the grille, and I went, okay, that's not so bad. But then I realized that something enormous got hit on the bottom right. If you can see that giant crack and this crack, and if you look really closely, hopefully you can see the stitches that were done in the body panel itself, and then Bondo showing through it. which is why I did notice a little bit of the filler tape at the top here. So this has been sort of patched, sort of resprayed, not great. Still can't get the shock absorber out. The carriage bolt right here is spinning in the middle part in the shock absorber. I'm gonna need to disassemble the entire bumper, I think, and get creative, which totally sucks, but I'm trying to stay really focused on the teardown here because truthfully that doesn't matter right now. So it's time to take the front end of the car off. Also, I want you to know that before you see me take off the condenser right there, that I took the car to a shop and I spent about $100 and I got the AC system evacuated before this point in time. I'm trying to do the responsible thing. I know it's hard sometimes or logistically not possible or you just don't want to spend the money, but we all know it's not good to release the Freon into the atmosphere. Don't do that. Try not to do that. For those of you that have never tried your hand at this type of project before, you might be interested to know just how long it takes to disconnect stuff. You never know when you're going to lose 15 minutes, half an hour on a sensor you can't get undone, or just something pops up. I spent most of the afternoon getting all the fluids out. I drained out all the coolant, and it was actually pretty easy because there was a second spot that the factory provided at the bottom of the car to help you do that. But then it took way longer to get all the power steering fluid out of there, break loose the AC lines, get rid of the condenser and the power steering cooler. But eventually all that stuff was done and out of the way, and I was able to remove the front carrier. And I moved on to the front fan, which I took off, and the accessory tensioner plus the accessory belt. And then just for fun, I took off the timing covers because I was interested to see what was back there. At that point, I assigned myself a side mission to take off the intake manifold so I could get a jump start on it later in the project. And of course, that required me to open up the fuel line, take off the fuel rail, and then start disconnecting the huge spaghetti factory of vacuum lines that are all around the front and side of the intake manifold, which only really left the bolts on the bottom of the intake manifold, and out she came. Sit rep. It's been a couple of days of on and off working on the car. I'm doing pretty good. I have gone off the beaten path already, which is very me to do. I stopped looking at the instructions mostly, and I did some side missions for reasons I'll talk about in a second. But it's been going pretty well. And if your thought in that last scene was this guy's got more money than brains for buying all those random tools when he didn't know if he actually needs them all, well, I did. I have been struggling through a couple of rusted fasteners. The big long bolt that was on the accessory tensioner right here was completely stripped out, and those extractors saved my ass big time. And honestly, it's just been really cool to look at this power plant because it's so similar but a little bit different in the ways of the V8 that are on the BHF, for example, like on the S4. And it's just kind of cool to see engineering decisions over time. Small example being the alternator. This one came out with only 2 bolts, which is great because it's air cooled. It just has a duct that pulls in air from the front grille to cool it down, unlike the little coolant lines, which are a huge pain in the ass to work with when you're installing the alternator on the other car. The other thing is I broke some stuff, which is somewhat to be expected, but I absolutely mangled the AC condenser. I was torquing the AC line on the side here, not this one, and I completely bent one of the side tubes and crushed it. So I've earned myself a new condenser. And another thing I learned is that the big front radiator actually has an automatic transmission cooler built into one side. So there's oil lines, an inlet and an outlet on the side here. And although I can't really see where it is and how the cooling is being achieved, I assume there's another couple of rows or a coil, or maybe the cooling just happens in the side tank itself. But there's actually, another fluid that's being cooled in there, and that's why this radiator is so big. Another sort of neat observation is the front mount. So normally on a car like the B6 or B7 S4, I would say there's a snub mount because you're used to seeing that little rubber mount that's right about here, and it sits in sort of like cup on the backside of the lock carrier. So the engine sort of like bucks into the cup when it's moving sort of vertically on the front. But back in the day, they solved it this way. So you can see why they upgraded this system, because in this way, it's held off to the side, but you also need this huge metal bracket, a full-size mount, and this huge other piece of metal that is essentially structural that's bolted in with 3 big bolts here just to make this connection happen. Another hot tip while I'm down here is you may have noticed in the time lapse that I knocked off the fan and the fan clutch that's on the other end of this thread typically. And Audi would have you believe that you need to buy a specialty tool to put 2 pins into here on sort of like a spanner and hold this still, like counter hold it while you take a wrench and then knock off the big bolt that's usually on here. You don't need to do that. What I did was I just took a pair of vice grips and I clamped down on the accessory belt to put on max tension on all of the accessory pulleys anyways. And that held it just strong enough where I could take a big wrench and I just smashed it off and I broke that nut loose. Trivia minute here too. This thread is a reverse thread, and I always thought that reverse threads were just Germans doing German things. And maybe it is. I don't know. If you know the real answer, tell me in the comments. But Now that I'm actually thinking about what this is all about, since the fan clutch was on here, so in other words, it engages and disengages to spin the fan or not, it's not electrically driven, kind of makes sense, because if you think about it in terms of righty-tighty, lefty-loosey thread, if a fan was spinning and then stopped all of a sudden, that stop of momentum might actually encourage the object to unthread itself unintentionally. So are reverse threads used in this circumstance? Let me know. One more thing before I get back to work here is sort of the condition of things that I've come across. So the good news I'll say is that the timing belt is super stiff. It doesn't look like it's new based on the idlers and stuff like that, but like good condition, and I'm hoping that timing is good. I really won't know until I get the valve covers off and take a look at the tensioners. I'm really hoping those are in good condition. If they're broken or heavily worn, well, this project will get a lot more expensive than it kind of already is turning itself into. So I hope we don't have to go down that road. But I wanted to show you a couple of things. So I've taken extra steps as I usually do, and I've started to strip back the wiring harness. And I wanted to get the intake manifold off so I could take a good look at itself and sort of what's going on here. Look how dirty it is. There is mouse poop down there. This grime is like next level. I've already given up on the fact that, you know, this stuff is going to get down into the cylinder. So I'm going to completely disassemble this engine to make sure it's clean. But when we take a look around, we've got some more acorns here, and it's just an absolute mess. Look at the back water pipe too. It's got so much rust. I'm going to need to take a good look at it, maybe clean it up, get it sandblasted, see if it's actually still worthy of use. Because I mean, if that's just going to be a leak in the future, I'm going to have to do something about that too. Which leads me to my final point, which is there's a lot of rust in the car. Take a look at these extra fun bonus pictures I took of the subframe. No bueno. I can tell that a lot of this stuff is going to have to come off, get treated after it's like fully sandblasted and prepped and everything. There's going to be a lot of like coatings in this series, I can tell, on my hardware, on the subframes, on major metal components. This is going to be a real me learning experience of what do you coat things to protect them properly when they're in different sorts of the engine and on the body. Final thing before I get back to work, I pried off the fuel rail. Yes, I pried it off. Maybe not the smartest decision. I did dent the bottom side of it in a couple of spots, and I think it's going to be okay, but I really don't like that I did that. I just couldn't get it out. Everything was so stuck. So hopefully I won't have to replace the fuel rail. I really don't want to. But check out the injectors, and you can see in these pictures there's the good, there's the kind of bad, and then there's the ugly. So the little pintles are what those plastic pieces are on the very end that have essentially come off. They got stuck on the inside of the intake manifold, and I can probably pry them out. As far as I can tell, none of them are broken. And if they are, I have to buy a kit. I think JHM sells them individually, but I don't want to replace that. I also don't want to replace the injectors either. I'm pretty sure they're okay. I think I might just find a place in the city to get them flow tested and cleaned to make sure that they're in good operating order. I am going to be doing a full disassembly, cleaning, and reassembly of the intake manifold, similar to what I did on the S4 minus the flapper mod. That being said, I do have some really nice parts from Grooven to fix the ongoing issues that I have with the pivot arms out front. You also might remember that I have an old set of JHM intake spacers that I did not use on the S4, and I can tell by looking at this motor that they're probably going to fit. So just the way that time has worked with JHM entering the market and these cars being a little bit old, I might be the only person to be running intake spacers on an S8 ever, but we'll see if they fit. We'll check it out later. Anyways, back to work. I am pretty much done releasing the engine from all electrical connections and fluid pipes and all that good stuff. So I'm going to head under the car pretty soon to start working on the exhaust and getting the transmission disconnected as well. Work has been completed under the car, not entirely. Namely, the catback system is out. Top part of the pipes are pretty rusted, but not too bad, not actually rusted through, but I can't really say the same for the resonator. I don't know if this is considered an actual exhaust leak, but pretty bad on both sides here. I would really like to have a Super Sprint exhaust system from the catback. They sound really good, I think. But they're pretty expensive. Don't know if it's going to be in the budget. I might actually just chop this part right here and straight pipe it all the way to the front again. Speaking of custom fabrication, a very critical piece of shop equipment just showed up, and this is actually going to let me physically get under the car and finish doing what I got to do. And that is a custom frame extension for my Quickjack. Now, I mentioned in the first video that I quickly realized my lift system couldn't even reach the jack points on the car. And I did check out the Quickjack site, and yes, they do sell an extension, but it only gives you another 6 inches, 3 on each side total, which is kind of a joke, to be honest. That isn't enough, considering it's the furthest edges, not the middle of your jacking point, to get onto a longer car. Makes no sense to me. So I have a very useful friend here in the city that makes some custom things for me. Also, he made the brackets that lets me hang up my sliding dollies on the wall too. But I just gave him some specs that I drew up. It's essentially a longer version of what Quickjack already sells. And it is made out of even thicker stock steel than what they create themselves. This is like super thick, super heavy. He does fantastic work. And this is 76 inches long. For perspective, this is 61, and I'm not talking the full length of a normal 5000 SLX. I'm just talking about the edges of where the trays go, so your furthest jacking points, or where you can actually hold the pucks to get up under somewhere. That is 61. The extension would get you to 65, and like I said, that's not going to cut it. This is 76. I'll just address the risk factor here for a second. Yes, this is a homemade piece of equipment. Could it fail? Yeah, it could. But we're using really high quality materials here, and I think the guy who does the work does excellent work. So I have the total faith in it. Anyways, we'll lift the car. I might put jacks out on the edges under the cantilevered points just as a fail-safe, but I'm sure Benpack would hate to know that people are out there in the market trying to replicate and improve upon their products. But I gotta lift the car somehow, and I'm not gonna use jack stands, so is what it is. Okay, you and I, moment of truth together. This is the first lift. I have not done this yet. All I did was put on the extension, put it up under the blocks, and side note, it's actually gonna be nice because this extension is gonna lift the car even higher than it normally would to give me another like 1.5 inches of clearance. Anyways, let's do this. So, control, up we go. Good. Let's just stop at the first lock point. Let's take a look. Yeah, I do see a little bit of deflection of what's hanging off the side here, but not bad. Looks okay. Let's go up to number 2. Ooh, that's high. That's nice. Okay, we're locked in. My measuring tape tells me I just achieved 20 inches from floor to the bottom of the chassis, which is awesome. That is a lot of room to work. So that worked out nicely. That being said, I only feel about 90% good about how this is being held up right now. I'm just gonna go grab some 4x4s, cut them to size so that they're really nice and snug, and I'll jam them into place out on the edges everywhere before I actually physically crawl under there and finish up my work. I decided to start off with the worst part under the car, which was a really rusted flange holding the driver's side cat up to its downpipe. Now, I've never seen a bolt head fray apart from rust before. I couldn't possibly put a socket on it, so I decided to start by just cutting the flange apart. There's just some studs holding it together. Then eventually I had to hammer it and spin that flange around so I could get access to the final stud that was at the top. Then I cut that loose. When that was done, I decided to tackle the O2 sensor on the rear, and although I had a little bit of success spinning it, I could tell even with heat that it was seized in there pretty good, and I was at risk of stripping it. So I bailed and I worked on the mount just in front of it, and of course I lit the bushing on fire just a little bit with my torch, but luckily enough it got the bolt loose and I was able to detach everything, at which point I had to go get clever and figure out how to get rid of that O2 sensor wire. Nothing is coming off under the car without a fight. There's lots of cutting going on and things are seized. That was the case for the rear O2 sensor on the driver's side, but thankfully I found a little trick I'm going to share with you now. So for context, rear O2 sensor, these things tend to get seized up pretty easily, and you can hit it with heat, which I did do, and it started to spin, but then I started to actually round off the fitting right here, and I bailed because I saw the plug going up into the chassis through that little grommet right there, and I thought, well, where's the other side of this thing go? It turns out if you go inside of the cabin and just take up the carpets on the floor, you'll see that the hole is actually conveniently right here, and you just follow the cord back, and the other side of your connector to your O2 sensors is just running along the side right here. So you can just unclip it and then deal with the reality of that stuck sensor on the bench. There's actually a huge silver lining here too, which is you might be able to make out the green water corrosion on the plug itself. And that's actually awesome news because I thought the cat was totally ruined. There's a DTC in the computer for that side in catalytic converter efficiency. And I thought I heard sort of like a little tingling noise. Like when I went under the car, I thought I heard a ting, 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 ting. And I thought the mesh of the cat was actually blown out. Not true, the cat is in perfect shape, and it just means that I need to replace an O2 sensor, and I'll follow this plug back upstream towards the ECU or the firewall, and I'll replace that pigtail too. So not so bad, way better than having to do something about the catalytic converter. Likewise, other stored trouble codes are starting to make a lot more sense. I had a trouble code for my headlight level sensor. Well, yeah, here you go. Look, the arm is completely busted off of the articulating sensor arm right there. So I'll just have to replace that. And then this one wasn't showing up on the computer, but check out the brake pad sensor here. Obviously it broke and somebody tried to patch it together, but it is connected to nothing. Should be over to here. So one new sensor line as well. Anyways, back to work. I'm actually getting close, although it's just very incremental, slow progress. I need to get one more downpipe out on the passenger side. Kind of fun note, it's not symmetrical. I don't know if it's because of the shape of the giant automatic transmission in these cars, but the cap that I took out on the driver's side is actually really short, and there's a really long tube coming down from the manifold on that side, but the opposite is true on the passenger side. So this time, to get the last cat out, I'm gonna have to reach way up there and try to disconnect it up closer to the exhaust manifold. Anyways, once that's done, I really only have to disconnect the parking brake cables, disconnect the gear selector, pop out both of the axles, and then mark up the drive shaft before I disconnect that, and then everything's ready to come out. First on the agenda is removing the passenger side axle, the short one, but I had to figure out pretty quickly how to stop the axle from spinning while I'm trying to take out those bolts. So that's what happens unless you take a few of your wheel bolts, run it through your rotor into the hub, and then use something, in my case a pry bar, inside of the rotor vanes to hold it still against the caliper. And then it was time to just take out the big bolt holding the hub to the other side of the axle. So I hit it with some heat and my new impact gun, and that came right out. On the side of the car, it wasn't too bad. I just had to find the right positioning of the spindle in order to give me some room to pull out that axle. Now the driver's side was a whole different problem. There was unfortunately some sort of leak. The entire area was covered in a grease. I don't know if it was the axle boot or potentially just a lot of overspray from a failed valve cover gasket above it, but I couldn't get my tools into the heads of any of the hardware that was in the axle shield or the axle itself. So I spent probably close to an hour with cleaner and a rag and a pick, and I had to clean out the inside head of every single one of those bolts so I could get my tool in there. And eventually I got everything out, thankfully. And I moved on to the big axle bolt on the outside, more heat, and it came out like a charm, which is great because those can be really, really stubborn. And at that point, it was time to actually pull out the axle. Now the axle on this side is a lot longer than the passenger side, so it took me quite a few different turning of the spindle to find the right angle and eventually get that thing out. And there's pure success right there. One of the last biggest items under the car was to remove the passenger side cat and its downpipe. And I learned pretty quickly that I couldn't reach the top nut that was holding it to the flange of the exhaust manifold. I also learned that you have to remove the EGR canisters on the back of both of the heads just to get some access in there and get that nut loose. So eventually I got that done, moved on to the bushing at the bottom, snapped the head right off of that bolt near the spring, so I just took off the other bushing, which was fine, and used my same O2 sensor wire trick from before. You have to take out the bolts that are holding the drive shaft to the transmission, of course, and once again I learned that I had to go to the back of the car now because I had no axles in the front. I put those wheel bolts through the brake rotors and hubs and actually used that to spin the drive shaft while I took out the rest of the hardware on it. I can't even tell you how long I was struggling with the driver's downpipe, even though it wasn't connected to anything on either of the sides. The fact that the O2 sensor on the front was still installed meant that I had no clearance to get it out anywhere. So I tried to take it out and I wrestled with it forever and had no leverage. I quit on that downpipe with the O2 sensor in there. I'll show you in a second what my game plan is for that, but I'm done. Off camera, I popped off the gear selector lever off the side of the transmission, and I also just unbolted the transmission mounts from the subframe. So as of right now, the engine and trans is totally just free sitting on top of the subframe. There's nothing bolted in. It is ready to come out. I'll feel really accomplished at the end of this episode, but for now, I'm further than I've ever been before on a car. It has taken me, I'll fully say, a month to get to this point. The car fought me the entire way though. I had to break loose so much rust. I was just rained on the other night when I was trying to hammer a bolt out. I've skipped a lot of stuff in the time lapses, even though I've been trying to show you guys a lot of stuff. It's taken some time, for sure. And I would say that you could probably do it faster. I have absolutely no doubt. But also admit that, I'm very particular about the way I work. I like to work in an extremely clean environment. I clean up all my tools and the floor and everything every time I'm done like a certain section of work on the car. And I've been bagging and tagging every single piece of hardware that comes off of the car. So I know exactly what I need to buy, or I can reuse. I know where everything's gonna go again. And that goes for my buy list as well. This is actually about half of it. I truly ran out of room, so I'm gonna have to transpose this to my computer and then start again. That is just hardware. That list has almost no parts on it, and obviously I haven't even gotten into most of the projects so far. I'm gonna have to replace essentially every single nut and bolt that I have taken off of this car. And at this point, this is really turning into a true restoration. Nonetheless, let's do it. Let's pull the engine and trans. This is my plan. I have the very unique advantage of using the Quickjacks because it has what's called radial shift, meaning when it comes up from the floor, not only does it come up, but also moves forward about a foot. So likewise, when the body goes down, it's gonna move backwards. So what I actually plan to do is obviously attach with the tackle, the engine to the crane here, and I'll support the trans. And I'm actually going to let the car move away from the engine and trans instead of pulling it out, so to say. Both will have to happen overall, but you'll see. I think I'm gonna get pretty far with this tactic. Let's go down a little lower. I wanna try to get this pipe out. Oh. Okay, well. Transmission mounts out because I took off the top bolt. Should be all the room in the world. Yes, 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 yes. Awesome, okay. Obstacle 1 is gone. So let's continue to the next lock point. Oh, Jesus. The Quickjack was coming off of the ground. It was literally tilting backwards as if the car could fall over, which means the weight is shifting too far to the back. This whole move of the car and hold the engine still idea might be total garbage. That was a terrible idea. I completely admit it. I was dumb enough to try, but smart enough to see when things were going totally sideways and I needed to stop. When I say sideways, I mean backwards. It was going to go out the back garage door if I kept going. The front edges of the Quickjack started to lift up off the ground and I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. I'm actually in danger. So obviously I have the wheels back on now. I'm going to put the car on the ground and hopefully I have enough clearance everywhere. I'll just pull the engine and trans out the front like a normal person. Come this way. Come, engine. I cracked the code. You can see the front end is not only up at a high angle, but I've also pitched it on the gantry here to favor this corner because I couldn't get the transmission mount. There's two. So unlike maybe if you watched the last series on the S4, usually there's two engine mounts and like one transmission mount, but in this case there's 2 and 2. I was able to get out the driver's side one, but not the passenger side one. And that becomes a problem because the subframe back there has a bit of a cup. So you can't just slide your mounts off the top of the subframe. You actually have to really lift it out, get it over that cup, and then out she can come. So I've twisted it and angled it, and she's coming, like right now. I still have to be cautious about the angle that the engine's coming out in general because there's still tubes and brake lines and stuff over here that I can smash apart if I'm not careful. So this is going to be one of those slowly but surely situations. Higher, higher again. This is fine. Should have used the crane at a further out position. This might get tricky, especially now that the engine has left the subframe and then some. I'm not gonna push it back in and drop it down and readjust this. I just gotta make it work. Come on. How about, I'm gonna slowly keep struggling with this and you guys can just watch a time lapse. Check it out. The GoPro died a little bit yesterday, but she's out. Didn't really take anything more than finagling and patience and time to kind of work it out with the jack and the lift at the same time, but you know, it can certainly be done by yourself. I'm just one guy. I managed it. It did take me pretty much most of the day. Like I said, that transmission mount on the side really did give me troubles. The manual does not say you need to take those out, but from me to you, now through experience, I would recommend that you take out those transmission mounts, make your life a lot easier. I must say I feel pretty proud to have pulled out the engine and trans. I know it's not a mind-blowing thing. YouTube makes it look so simple, but honestly, it is not. It is a pretty involved process. I'll bet that most people who like cars haven't done it before. And for me, this project is just going to be full of firsts. There's so much stuff coming up that I've never done before, so I do think it's probably going to take me quite a bit of time. That's okay. You know, this is officially a project car now, so I'm okay with that. But I'm really looking forward to learning so many new things. Even looking back on my S4 project, from when I first started to when I ended, I had so many more tools and knowledge, and now it's already helped me on the S8, but I'm really looking forward to the process here. And that's where episode 3 is going to take us. I'm going to get straight into it, and we will separate the trans from the engine, get the engine up on an engine stand, and then you're going to watch me strip it down from all the accessories. They'll take it to a long block down to a short block, and then you'll see me completely disassemble the engine because I have decided that I'm going to rebuild the engine. I really like the idea that after all this work, I'm going to be driving around in a 0-kilometer S8. So that is it for this one. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching me struggle and learn and get this thing out. But I also hope that it inspires you to get in the garage and take on some bigger projects than you've ever done before. I'm just some guy, you know, I am only an automotive enthusiast. I have a totally different day job, but I can manage to do this stuff too. So I know you can as well. Last, as a reminder, I am on Instagram at @FigureItAudi, and I try to post pretty much every day. So if you want to see what's going on between episodes, follow me there too. Thanks again. See you next time.